Hi friends, and welcome back to Notebook Left Behind. I'm your host Mark, and this is the first part of my May monthly reading roundup. Hi friends, and it's great to be back, and I wasn't away too long, was I? Just a week. But there are reasons for that. And just in case you're not aware and you didn't see last week's video, basically my home was the subject of an arson attack earlier in the month, which put me off the air for a week and has left basically a layer of soot everywhere to some extent or another. This particular room was the least affected by the fire downstairs. At least I think so. Although we had some engineers round who were talking about replacing the roof in the lounge where the fire actually took place, and I'm kind of sitting on the on that roof now. So if I suddenly disappear, you'll know what's happened. Yes. Anyway, parts of the property were much more affected than others, so this is not too bad. And we're in the situation now where we're between all those experts coming around in teams of two to do all their photograph taking and clipboard writing and assessments and everything, and the actual work to restore the place and repair what's damaged beginning, which should happen, fingers crossed, in a few days. The next thing is to have the actual site meeting where the planning gets scheduled. So this has all been obviously quite disruptive, shall we say, to some extent. But as we're in this quiet period between all those insurance people making their assessments and the work actually beginning, when obviously I shall have to move out for a while, I thought I'd just take these few days to cram in filming of as many videos as possible, see if I could get them all edited, so I could schedule them for the next few weeks, so there won't be any loss of content. You'll still get something every week from me. At least that's the intention. That's the plan anyway. So after that somewhat convoluted intro, let's talk about what I read in May. Now, so I'm going back to it. Another consequence of the fire was that I had no power for about a week here. So what could I do? Well, I could read, couldn't I? So I have actually read a few more books this month than I usually do. And so I don't know how many parts this video is going to be split up into. Because the month's not over yet. I've still got time to do more books. But we'll stick to 5 today. We'll do the first 5 of the month today. Okay, so finally let's get started. And the first book to be considered this month is The Outcast and Other Dark Tales by E.F. Benson. Now this one is the 14th in the British Library's Tales of the Weird series, and does have one remarkable thing going for it. It's one of only 3 volumes that I've got that is not now covered by a heavy layer of soot. But as for the book itself, well, I came into this without too much enthusiasm, because E.F. Benson had tales included in 3 previous volumes of Tales of the Weird, and I wasn't impressed with any of those stories. They were fine, but they were just pretty much unremarkable. So I wasn't really overly hyped for this one, and there isn't anything here that really changed my mind, I'm sorry to say. Basically, Benson comes up with some good setups, but the resolution to his stories, the development of them, just follows very predictable and kind of just underwhelming lines. This is particularly true of the title story, The Outcast, which I think is the best one here in respect of the setup, in that it's about a woman who, after she dies, neither earth nor sea will accept her corpse. It keeps throwing her back up again. And this is an interesting notion, and simply because it actually plays into a bit of old vampire mythology from the Middle Ages, when finding bodies that had been buried had risen to the surface was seen as evidence of the undead, whereas really it was more about scavenging dogs, shallow graves, and the action of internal gases during decomposition. But this story was, a good setup, and I was looking forward to finding out why this particular woman was rejected in this way by earth and sea, but you don't really find out. And that kind of sums up really how I found a lot of Benson's tales to be. Just, as I say, just very underwhelming. There is probably the best one here is the flint knife, which is interestingly enough based on an apparent encounter that Benson had with, I guess, what you'd call the real life supernatural, which he details elsewhere in a short piece called The Secret Garden. And the flint knife is the most fully realised tale, I felt. It had a beginning, a middle and an end, and was satisfying, rather than just these other tales which often just kind of had a beginning and then limped towards a kind of predictable ending. So yeah, I was pretty much underwhelmed with these. They're not terrible or anything. I think they're perfectly serviceable. I think the best thing that I've read by Benson is not included here, which is a story called The Room in the Tower. Yeah, that's a good one. But these, they just didn't really do it for me, and I can't imagine that I'll be seeking out any more of his work. So next up after that, we've got, we move to the digital arena, because as well as the incident with the petrol bomb, I had a month where, the first part of the month anyway, I spent some time on public transport and in waiting rooms, hanging around for appointments and stuff. So obviously, what do you do in those circumstances? You take your e-reader. So my Kobo was with me and my Kindle was with me on one occasion as well. And so I have read a couple of books that I had loaded on there. And the first of those is Peter Cheney's Can Ladies Kill? Now, if you're not familiar with Cheney's name, he was a British author, most active in the 1930s and 1940s, who wrote pulp fiction and was most celebrated for his creation of the FBI agent Lemmy Caution. And this book is the fourth in that series. And on this occasion, a mysterious letter is received at FBI headquarters, which gets Caution sent to the West Coast to investigate possible federal crimes. But when he gets there, he finds the letter writer is already dead. Her mangled corpse turns up floating in San Francisco Bay. Unfortunately, the letter was very vague as to its details. But Lemmy discovers that the writer was married to a lawyer with connections to a dubious underworld figure who is apparently now going straight with a legitimate trucking business. Before many hours have passed, someone has taken a shot at Lemmy, and it's not long before he uncovers a tangled web of murder, mayhem, blackmail and smuggling. This novel pretty much follows the same pattern as the other three I've already read in the series. Lemmy is summoned to a strange town on a mysterious assignment. He immediately encounters a series of very dubious, dodgy hoodlums and turns the heads of 2 or 3 delicious dames who are up to their necks in whatever is going on. He's shot at several times, almost killed, but turns the tables on the villains in the final act with a mixture of bravado and more than a little bit of luck. Now, these are pretty formulaic for the most part. The only difference really is in their presentation, because the stories are told in the first person, and I could best describe it as stream of consciousness pulp, really, because we spend an awful lot of time in Lemmy's head as he considers the facts and circumstances of the case, formulating theories here, rejecting others there, basically trying to fit all the pieces together into a coherent whole. If you want an idea of what that's like, try imagining a movie where you have almost constant voiceover from the hero, and that's likely to be kind of divisive in the reading experience for some who aren't just going to appreciate that. Personally, I do enjoy these. They're certainly not great art or great writing. I would never suggest that, but they are very entertaining and they're a very swift and enjoyable read. I mean, what I enjoy most, I suppose, is the character of Lemmy himself, although it is possible that I am slightly biased because I do have an affection for the series of French movies that were made from the novels in the 1950s and early 1960s, which starred American actor and singer Eddie Constantine. And Constantine is, quite frankly, one of the coolest guys ever to appear before a motion picture camera. And I just visualise him when I'm reading the books, and that really does help make them enjoyable and a pleasant experience for me as a reader. Constantine was no slick, handsome James Bond figure, but he oozed charisma at a level that most Hollywood leading men can only dream of. Famous French New Wave director Jean-Luc Godard was such a fan that he cast Constantine as Lemmy Caution in his famous dystopian sci-fi movie Alphaville, which came out in 1965. And he recruited Constantine to play Caution again almost 25 years later in his 1981 film Germany 1990. Now, this novel is available for Kindle in a collection called The Complete Works of Peter Cheney, which is very reasonably priced indeed. But I warn you, if you're trying to check that out, or if you're tempted to do so, I think there are a couple of titles missing from it. I might be mistaken. Some further research is required, because obviously novels are often retitled, but they don't look like they're there to me, and they are two that I particularly wanted to read, which is quite annoying. Now, this is brisk, pulpy entertainment, although its narrative style is likely to be a bit divisive. Personally, I enjoy them, but I certainly wouldn't make any great literary claims for them. Now let's move on to the next one I read in the digital world, and that was The Chinese Orange Mystery by Ellery Queen. Now, this is about a man who is murdered in a suite of apartments high above the New York streets in the swanky Hotel Chancellor. This suite of apartments is rented by Dr. Kirk, a famous publisher and collector of rare antiques and postage stamps. Now, neither he nor any of his friends or colleagues claim to know the man at all. And the really weird thing is that when they find the body, his clothes have all been turned backwards, and all the furniture and pictures in the room have been turned to face the wall. It's another tricky mystery for amateur sleuth Ellery Queen and his father, an inspector with the New York Police Department. Now, my first encounter with Ellery Queen was in the 1970s, when the US network TV show with Jim Hutton debuted on the BBC in, I think, a weekday early evening slot, if memory serves. And two things that I do remember about it. The first was that there was a moment in each episode where Hutton broke the fourth wall and talks directly into the camera and would say something along the lines of, "You've seen all the clues, now can you solve the mystery?" before returning to the action for the denouement. Now, that was the first thing I remember, but the other thing, well, that was the fact that these actual resolutions were kind of too outlandish to be credible. They were so complicated as to be virtually unguessable. And in fact, I seem to recall, and this is a very old memory obviously, but I seem to recall that's why we stopped watching the show. The solutions were just a little bit too silly. And if the original novel of The Chinese Orange Mystery is anything to go by, then those filmmakers were being quite faithful to their source material. Because, yes, this is an intriguing setup, but again, the solution does push the suspension of disbelief quite far. Yes, solutions always tend to be disappointing because, well, it's the same as finding out how a magic trick's been done. But this one, well, yes, it does make sense. You certainly can't deny the logic of it when you've got all the facts. But the chances of you actually being able to guess everything from what you're presented with is, well, very unlikely indeed, I would say. I also had the feeling time to time during the second act that the book was spinning its wheels quite a lot. Some of the red herrings did seem very contrived. I mean, I did enjoy it. It wasn't bad or anything, but I certainly wouldn't really be actively seeking out reading any more entries in the series. The book was adapted into the movie The Mandarin Mystery in 1936 from Republic Pictures, which starred Eddie Quinlan. Now, Quinlan was more known as a comic actor than anything else, so unfortunately the elements of comedy, well, they're not heightened from the book because they weren't really there in the book in the first place, but they're kind of introduced. And also there's a swapping of characters for the sole purpose, apparently, of giving Ellery a love interest. And that does feel pretty contrived. There's also a complete switch of the motivation behind what's been going on, where there's apparently this counterfeiting ring who make valuable stamps, which wouldn't seem to be a great business model if you're a crook, to be honest. Yeah, it's not particularly good, and I wouldn't say it was really worth your time. Queen is, of course, presented as both the hero and the teller of these tales, but he's not really the author. You won't be surprised to learn that Ellery Queen was not a real person, but a pseudonym for two cousins who wrote together, Frederick Denay and Manfred Bennington Lee. And those weren't their real names either, because those were professional names. Now, the duo were pretty reluctant to discuss their writing methods, but it seems likely that it was Denay who came up with the plots and the solutions, and Lee who did the actual writing, although there was quite clearly probably some crossover between those roles along the way. Although perhaps not much discussed today, these books were incredibly popular in their time, and Denay took the opportunity to found Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine in 1941, which 85 years later can still be found on your local newsstand, if you have such a thing. If you're a mystery fan, you should definitely check out one of these books, if only because of their undoubted influence on the whole mystery genre. Me, I'll probably stick to watching reruns of the 1940s Hollywood movie series with Ralph Bellamy and the lovely Margaret Lindsay. And next up we have Harry Whittington's 1962 novel A Haven for the Damned. Now this is the tale of a bank robbery in the small desert town of Yucca City. The two criminals, Fletch and Poole, escape, dragging bank teller Matt Bishop with them as a hostage, but during a hail of gunfire, Bishop is shot and injured, but they still bundle him into the car and head out towards the desert hills. There they take refuge in a ghost town called Lust, population 1 man and his dog. This man is Josh Cardell, a failed prospector. The villains send for Bishop's wife in order to transport the money into Mexico safely, but in the meantime lovers Harry and Millie turn up, lost on the road but pursued by her vengeful husband Reed. So this is a pressure cooker tale of 7 people stuck in a very small, confined setting with 2 guys in charge, both with guns, calling the shots. Now this is a prime slice of vintage paperback noir, very slick and efficiently written, if perhaps a tiny bit disposable. There are no great plot twists or wild story developments, just a lean driving narrative that lasts less than 150 pages and leaves you thoroughly entertained. At least it did me. The only slight tweak to the well-worn formula, and a very welcome one, is the fact that, things don't turn out quite as you expect. From the start, you expect Matt Bishop and his wife to be hero and heroine, and particularly because Bishop needs a redemption arc, because it's no great spoiler to let you know that he was in on the robbery from the beginning. But instead, it's Cardell and Millie who turn out to be the main lead characters here, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was something that happened during the writing process, when Whittington simply found them much more interesting characters than Bishop and his wife. Now this novel has been republished under the Black Gat imprint by the lovely Stark House Press, who should really begin sponsoring me considering the amount of name checks they get in my videos. But this is a series of books which I think now stretches to maybe 60 or 70 volumes, which are republications of pulp fiction from the mid part of the 20th century. And this is the first one of them that I've read, but without my knowledge, I actually managed to read 2 more of them this month, so we'll be hearing about Black Cat books again. In short, if you like short, snappy crime fiction, you could do a lot worse than check this one out. I was thoroughly entertained by it. But be warned, if you like Whittington's work so much that you want to check out his other novels, you might find that you let yourself in for a little bit of work, because there's a list of them in the back here, and that's quite daunting. Oh, and there's all these ones as well. So yeah, he was a busy man. Finally today we have the 2010 novel The Burning Wire by Geoffrey Deaver, which is another in his long-running Lincoln Rhyme series. And if you're not familiar with Lincoln Rhyme as a character, he's a top forensic detective who was badly injured in a crime scene accident that left him a quadriplegic, but he still works for the NYPD from a private lab at his home with the aid of an unofficial team of NYPD detectives and experts. The Burning Wire finds him pitted against an electrical genius who uses the New York City grid to carry out seemingly terrorist acts. No one knows his identity and his motivations remain obscure, although he does seem to be targeting a particular power company, and the demands that he makes before his attacks are all about people using less electricity, so it seems he might be some kind of eco-terrorist. But is there something else entirely going on? Now, if you're at all familiar with my channel and you've been watching some of my reading roundups, you'll already know that I'm a huge fan of Deaver and particularly of this series. And The Burning Wire carries on with just this exceptional level of excellence that he's conjured throughout. Although this was 400 pages and a bit of a doorstop, I read this in a couple of days, the same time roughly that it took me to read that Harry Whittington book I was just talking about, which was probably about a third of its length, I would guess. Because the thing is with The Burning Wire, I just kept picking it up. Every idle moment I just thought, oh, I'll just read another chapter. And then, of course, a couple of hours later, I realised that I'd read about another 50 pages or so. It's just great entertainment, a twisty, turning thriller that keeps you guessing all the way through. Talking of which, of course, when you're reading a book like this and it's a mystery, you're trying to put all the pieces together in your head as you read. And there was a point in this novel where I suddenly made a small but significant connection between a couple of pieces of evidence that Lincoln Rhyme seemed to have missed. And I've been reading Deaver's books for, years and years. I must have read over 25 of them, and this has never happened before. And there I was in smug mode, quite frankly, sitting back thinking, okay, I may not be right, but I think I am, and Rhyme hasn't spotted it. I'm cleverer than Lincoln Rhyme. And then, of course, 120 pages later, it's revealed that Rhyme knew about this all the time, and it didn't mean what I thought it meant anyway. So, yeah, that was really annoying. I thought I was ahead of the game. For once, I thought I was ahead of the game, and I wasn't. And I'll tell you, Deaver, I'll get you for that, mate. I really will. I'm going to track you down, and when I'm in charge, when my world domination... Now, this is number 9 in the Lincoln Rhyme series, and it gets a very high recommendation from me. I read the first 7 of these many, many years ago, so it's a little hard for me to judge in context with the rest of the series, and I still think the very first one, The Bone Collector, is my absolute favourite, but it still gets a very high recommendation from me. So that's it for the first part of my somewhat chaotic May reading roundup. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for staying with me right the way until the end. And if you did, why not pop me a quick like, or alternatively subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my future videos. And please remember, keep seeking out those dusty second-hand bookshops in those narrow, forgotten back streets of your town. Keep visiting those market stalls, car boot sales and charity shops, because there are treasures out there that only you can find. Be seeing you.